Welcome to the Sleepy Physicist, where complex ideas meet quiet contemplation. If you're settling in for the evening, perhaps with a warm cup of tea, or simply seeking a moment of intellectual calm, you've found the right place. Tonight, we're venturing into territory that has left some of the brightest minds in physics deeply unsettled, exploring concepts that challenge everything we think we know about life, death, and the nature of reality itself. Before we begin our gentle journey through these profound ideas, I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from tonight. Are you watching from a cozy apartment in Tokyo as dawn approaches, or perhaps from a quiet room in London as midnight settles in? Feel free to share your location and local time in the comments below. And if you find value in these thoughtful explorations of science and philosophy, a gentle like and subscribe would mean the world to me. It helps other curious souls discover this peaceful corner of the internet where big ideas unfold slowly and deliberately. Now here's something that might make you pause and consider the very nature of your existence. Imagine, just for a moment, that every time you should die, you don't. Not because of luck, not because of medical intervention, but because of something far stranger. What if the fundamental laws of quantum mechanics suggest that from your perspective, you can never truly experience death? What if there's a version of you that continues living in an alternate reality every time disaster strikes? This isn't science fiction. This is quantum immortality, and it's one of the most disturbing concepts in modern theoretical physics. The mere mention of this idea sends chills down the spines of physicists worldwide, not because it's obviously wrong, but because it might be terrifyingly right. And the reason it terrifies them isn't what you might expect. It's not the prospect of living forever that haunts these brilliant minds. It's something far more unsettling, something that strikes at the very heart of what it means to be conscious, to be human, to be you. Tonight, we're going to explore this deeply troubling corner of quantum mechanics with the careful attention it deserves. We'll unpack the mathematics, examine the philosophy, and confront the implications that keep theoretical physicists awake at night. But we'll do so gently, thoughtfully, allowing each concept to settle before moving to the next. To understand why quantum immortality fills scientists with dread, we first need to journey back to 1957, to a moment when a young physicist named Hugh Everett III proposed an idea so radical, so fundamentally challenging to our understanding of reality, that it would reshape physics forever. Everett was working on his doctoral dissertation at Princeton University, grappling with one of the most perplexing problems in quantum mechanics, the measurement problem. Picture yourself in a laboratory, observing a single photon as it approaches a beam splitter. According to quantum mechanics, before you observe it, that photon exists in what's called a superposition. It's simultaneously taking both paths, existing in multiple states at once. But the moment you look, the moment you measure, something strange happens. The superposition collapses, and the photon is found travelling down just one path. This collapse seemed to require an observer, suggesting that consciousness itself played a fundamental role determining physical reality. This troubled many physicists. How could the universe depend on observation? What constituted an observer? Where exactly did the quantum world end and the classical world begin? These questions led to heated debates and various interpretations, each attempting to resolve the mystery in their own way. Everett's solution was as elegant as it was disturbing. What if, he proposed, the wave function never collapses at all? What if every possible outcome of every quantum measurement actually occurs but in separate parallel realities? In this view, when that photon hits the beam splitter, it doesn't choose one path, Instead, reality itself splits. In one universe, the photon goes left. In another, it goes right. Both outcomes are equally real, equally valid, equally true. This became known as the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, and it suggested something almost incomprehensible. Every quantum event, from the decay of a radioactive atom to the firing of a neuron in your brain, creates a branching of reality, infinite universes, infinite versions of you, infinite possibilities, all unfolding simultaneously in the vast multiverse. Most physicists at the time found this idea preposterous. The notion of countless parallel universes seemed more like science fiction than serious science. Everett's thesis advisor, the legendary John Wheeler, was initially supportive but grew concerned about the radical implications. The physics community largely ignored or dismissed Everett's work. Discouraged, Everett eventually left academic physics altogether, taking his revolutionary ideas with him into relative obscurity. But ideas have a way of persisting, especially profound ones. Over the decades that followed, a small but dedicated group of physicists began to take the many worlds interpretation seriously. They recognized that while it seemed outlandish, it actually solved many of the conceptual problems that plagued other interpretations of quantum mechanics. It was mathematically consistent, it didn't require any special role for consciousness, and it treated all parts of the universe according to the same quantum rules. Among those who took notice was a brilliant young physicist named Max Tegmark. In the 1990s, while working on his own understanding of quantum mechanics and parallel universes, Tegmark began to consider the implications of the many worlds interpretation for something far more personal and immediate: death itself. If every possible quantum outcome creates a separate reality, Tegmark reasoned, then every moment of your life where you could potentially die must also create a branching. In most universes, you die as expected, but in at least one branch, through some quantum mechanical process, you survive against all odds. Your consciousness, according to this logic, can only experience the realities where you remain alive to experience them. This led Tegmark to formulate what became known as the quantum suicide thought experiment. Imagine a device connected to a Geiger counter, designed to detect the decay of radioactive atoms. Each time an atom decays, the device has a 50% chance of firing a lethal mechanism. According to classical probability, after several trials, the chances of survival become vanishingly small. But according to the many worlds interpretation, combined with quantum immortality, something extraordinary happens. While versions of you die in countless parallel universes, your consciousness always finds itself in the branch where you miraculously survive. Click after click, you beat the odds. Not because you're lucky, but because you can only observe realities where observation is possible. The implications are staggering. If quantum immortality is real, then from your subjective perspective, you are functionally immortal. Every car accident that should kill you results in an unlikely survival. Every disease that should claim your life somehow spares you through an improbable series of quantum events. Death, from your point of view, becomes impossible. This might sound like a wonderful thing, like the ultimate victory over mortality itself. But here's where the true horror begins to emerge. The reason why this concept fills scientists with dread rather than hope. Consider what survival might actually look like in a quantum immortal universe. You don't simply avoid death and continue living a normal life. Instead, you survive through increasingly unlikely, increasingly bizarre circumstances. That car accident doesn't kill you, but it might leave you severely injured, clinging to life through a series of medical miracles that shouldn't be possible. That heart attack doesn't end your life, but it might leave you in a state of prolonged suffering, kept alive by quantum coincidences that defy all medical explanation. Remember, quantum immortality doesn't promise comfortable survival. It only promises that your consciousness will always find itself in a reality where it continues to exist. The quality of that existence, the nature of that survival, could be horrific beyond imagination. Dr. Aranyossi, a philosopher who has studied these implications extensively, describes two particularly disturbing scenarios that quantum immortality might produce. The first he calls the momentary life picture, where you experience eternal life, spent almost entirely unconscious, punctuated by extremely brief amnesiac moments of awareness. Your consciousness flickers in and out of existence, like a dying light bulb, experiencing just enough awareness to satisfy the technical requirements of observation. The second scenario involves what he terms forced experience of extremely unlikely events. As you age and face the natural decline of your body, quantum immortality might require increasingly contrived circumstances to keep you alive. Your body deteriorates, your organs fail, your brain begins to shut down, but quantum mechanics finds a way to preserve just enough consciousness to keep you observing. The result could be an existence of unimaginable suffering, a consciousness trapped in a failing body, sustained only by the cruelest mathematics of parallel realities. But perhaps the most terrifying aspect of quantum immortality is its profound isolation. If this theory is correct, your experience of reality gradually diverges from everyone else's. To your friends and family in their respective realities, you will appear to die at some point. They will mourn you, remember you, and move on with their lives. But your consciousness continues in increasingly improbable branches of reality, branches where your survival becomes more and more unlikely, more and more removed from the normal flow of events. You become, in essence, alone in your branch of existence. The people you love exist only in their own parallel realities, realities where you're long dead. The world you inhabit becomes increasingly strange, increasingly disconnected from the natural order, as quantum mechanics works overtime to maintain your consciousness through ever more contrived circumstances. This isolation compounds the horror. Not only might you suffer through impossible survival scenarios, but you would do so completely alone, cut off from meaningful relationships, cut off from the shared reality that makes human connection possible. You become a ghost, haunting a universe that has moved beyond you, sustained only by the merciless logic of quantum mechanics. Even Max Tegmark himself, the physicist most closely associated with formalizing the quantum suicide experiment, has expressed deep reservations about his own creation. In later interviews and papers, Tegmark has distanced himself from the most extreme implications of quantum immortality. He points out that death is rarely an instantaneous binary event. Instead, it's usually a gradual process of declining consciousness, a slow dimming of awareness that unfolds over seconds, minutes, hours, or even years. This gradual nature of death, Tegmark argues, undermines the clean logic of quantum immortality. As your brain cells die, as your neural networks shut down, your consciousness doesn't simply transfer to a parallel universe where you're perfectly healthy. Instead, it experiences the natural decline that characterizes normal death, a process that has nothing to do with quantum mechanics and everything to do with biology. But even Tegmark's reservations don't fully address the deep philosophical problems that quantum immortality creates. The theory raises fundamental questions about the nature of consciousness, identity, and what it means to be you. If your consciousness can jump between parallel universes, what maintains your sense of self across these transitions? Are you still the same person after surviving through quantum mechanical miracles, or do you become something else entirely? These questions touch on some of the deepest mysteries in philosophy and neuroscience. We don't fully understand what consciousness is, how it emerges from the physical processes of the brain, or what gives you your unique sense of being you rather than someone else. Quantum immortality assumes that consciousness can somehow transcend physical death and continue in alternate realities. But this assumption rests on foundations we don't yet understand. The mathematical framework underlying quantum immortality also presents serious problems. The theory relies heavily on the concept of probability within the many worlds interpretation, but probability becomes deeply problematic when every possible outcome actually occurs. If all possibilities are realized across the multiverse, in what sense can we speak of some events being more likely than others? This problem, known as the measure problem, has plagued the many worlds interpretation since its inception. Without a clear understanding of how to assign probabilities in a universe where everything happens, the predictions of quantum immortality become questionable at best. The mathematics that seem to guarantee your survival might be built on conceptual quicksand. As we delve deeper into these disturbing implications, we begin to see why quantum immortality has become one of the most unsettling concepts in modern physics. It's not simply a theoretical curiosity or an abstract mathematical exercise. If true, it represents a fundamental reimagining of what it means to be human, to be mortal, to exist in relationship with others and with the universe itself. The terror that quantum immortality inspires in scientists isn't rooted in fear of death, but in fear of a kind of existence that might be worse than death. An existence of isolation, suffering, and gradual degradation sustained by the cold logic of quantum mechanics. An existence where the natural rhythms of life and death, the cycles that give meaning to human experience, are replaced by an endless, lonely journey through increasingly improbable realities. But our exploration of this deeply troubling concept is far from over. In the next part of our journey, we'll examine the specific mechanisms that quantum immortality proposes, the scientific criticisms that have emerged, and the broader implications for our understanding of consciousness and reality itself. We'll also explore why some physicists argue that the very premise of quantum immortality might be fundamentally flawed, offering perhaps some comfort to those troubled by its implications. For now, though, I invite you to sit with these ideas, to feel their weight and their strangeness. Consider how they challenge your assumptions about existence, about mortality, about the nature of your own consciousness. These are not comfortable thoughts, but they are profound ones, touching on some of the deepest questions humans have ever asked about the nature of reality itself. The reality becomes even more disturbing when we consider the actual mechanics of how quantum immortality might operate in practice. Scientists have identified what they call the probability amplitude problem, and it reveals perhaps the most chilling aspect of this entire concept. In quantum mechanics, every possible outcome of an event exists with what's called a probability amplitude. Think of this as the mathematical weight that determines how likely you are to find yourself in any particular branch of reality. When you survive a quantum suicide experiment, your probability amplitude in that surviving branch becomes vanishingly small. You exist, yes, but you exist with an infinitesimally tiny mathematical weight compared to your previous state. What does this mean, in practical terms? Imagine your existence as a candle flame. Each time you survive through quantum immortality, that flame grows dimmer, weaker, less substantial. You're still burning, still conscious, but your presence in reality becomes gossamer thin. You exist in realities that are increasingly marginal, increasingly removed from the mainstream flow of the multiverse. Dr. Peter Lewis, a philosopher of science who has studied these implications extensively, describes it as becoming probabilistically ghost-like. You maintain consciousness, but your reality becomes so improbable, so weighted toward the impossible, that you essentially become a phantom haunting the outer edges of existence. This leads us to one of the most profound questions in all of physics. What happens to personal identity when you exist across multiple realities simultaneously? Every moment of your life, according to the many worlds interpretation, you're branching into countless versions. There's a version of you that chose tea instead of coffee this morning, a version that took a different route to work, a version that made different choices in countless small and large ways. But if quantum immortality is real, your conscious experience somehow threads through only those branches where you survive. This raises a fundamental question about continuity of self. Are you the same person who went to sleep last night? Or are you a quantum survivor who happens to share memories with countless dead versions of yourself? The philosopher Derek Parfit spent much of his career grappling with similar questions about personal identity. He argued that what we think of as a continuous self might be an illusion, that we might be more like a river than a rock, constantly changing while maintaining an appearance of consistency. Quantum immortality takes this concept to its extreme conclusion, suggesting that your sense of continuous identity might persist even as you literally die and are reborn in parallel realities moment by moment. This isn't merely an abstract philosophical puzzle. If quantum immortality is real, it means that right now, as you listen to these words, countless versions of you are dying in parallel universes. Heart attacks, accidents, sudden catastrophes, all claiming the lives of your parallel selves. Yet your consciousness persists, somehow selecting only those branches where you continue to exist. Continue to listen, continue to wonder about the nature of your own existence. The isolation this implies is almost incomprehensible. Every person you've ever loved exists primarily in realities where you're dead. Your parents, your children, your closest friends, they live in universes where they've mourned your loss and moved forward with their lives. The version of them that shares your current reality becomes increasingly improbable, increasingly distant from their own natural flow of existence. Think about this carefully. If you're quantum immortal, then everyone you interact with as you age is also trapped in increasingly improbable realities. Realities where they too have survived far beyond their natural lifespan through quantum mechanical miracles. The world becomes populated by ghosts, by probability shadows, by consciousness clinging to existence through the thinnest threads of mathematical possibility. But perhaps the most terrifying aspect of quantum immortality is what physicists call the degradation cascade. As your body ages and begins to fail, the quantum mechanical interventions required to keep you conscious become more and more extreme. Your brain might suffer strokes that should leave you unconscious, but quantum effects preserve just enough neural activity to maintain awareness. Your organs might fail in ways that should be fatal, but quantum fluctuations maintain just the minimal function necessary for consciousness. The result isn't the graceful, aging and natural death that characterizes normal human experience. Instead, it's a horrific prolongation of consciousness in a progressively failing body, sustained by quantum mechanical processes that care nothing for your comfort, your dignity, or your peace. Dr. Aaron Yossi's research suggests that quantum immortal beings might experience what he terms consciousness fragmentation. As your brain deteriorates but is prevented from fully shutting down by quantum effects, your sense of self might begin to splinter. Memories could become disconnected, personality might fragment, and your experience of time and reality could become increasingly distorted. Imagine experiencing consciousness not as a smooth flow of awareness, but as a series of disconnected moments, like frames of a damaged film reel. You might find yourself aware in a hospital room, then suddenly conscious decades later, with no memory of the intervening time, then aware again in circumstances you can't understand or recognize. Your existence becomes a series of quantum mechanical glitches, preserving consciousness in ways that bear little resemblance to human experience. This fragmentation problem reveals why many scientists find quantum immortality more horrifying than comforting. It doesn't promise the kind of immortality that humans have dreamed about for millennia, the preservation of youth and vitality and meaningful experience. Instead, it threatens a kind of existence that might be worse than any hell imagined by human religion or philosophy. The practical implications become even more disturbing when we consider what physicists call anthropic shadows. These are the increasingly unlikely events required to maintain your survival as you age. At first, the quantum mechanical interventions might be subtle, minor fluctuations that tip the scales in your favor. But as you grow older and face more serious threats to your existence, the required interventions become more dramatic. You might find yourself the sole survivor of accidents that should have killed everyone involved. You might recover from diseases through medical miracles that defy all scientific understanding. Weather patterns might shift in impossible ways to prevent disasters that would otherwise claim your life. The very laws of physics might seem to bend around you, creating a bubble of impossibility that follows you through existence. To outside observers, if any still exist in your increasingly improbable reality, you would appear to be the luckiest person who ever lived. But you would know the truth. You're not lucky, you're trapped. Trapped in a reality that becomes more artificial, more contrived, more removed from natural law with each passing moment. Some physicists have speculated that quantum immortal beings might eventually require intervention from advanced civilizations or exotic physics to maintain their existence. As the probability of natural survival approaches zero, only increasingly fantastic explanations can account for continued consciousness. You might find yourself rescued by time travelers, saved by alien intervention, or sustained by technologies that shouldn't exist in your timeline. This leads to what researchers call the reality breakdown problem. In a quantum immortal scenario, the reality you inhabit becomes so improbable, so dependent on unlikely events that it begins to lose coherence. The laws of physics become suggestions rather than rules. Causality becomes optional. The very fabric of space-time might warp around the impossible requirement that you continue to observe. Max Tegmark himself has acknowledged this problem, noting that quantum immortal realities might require what he calls reality engineering to maintain consistency. The universe might need to constantly rewrite its own history, adjusting past events to accommodate the impossible survival of conscious observers. But even more disturbing is the possibility that quantum immortality might not be unique to you. If the theory is correct, then every conscious being might be quantum immortal from their own perspective. This means that the reality you inhabit isn't just shaped by the requirement that you survive, but by the requirement that every other conscious being in your reality also survives. The mathematical complexity of maintaining multiple quantum immortal observers in the same reality becomes staggering. The universe would need to choreograph an infinitely complex dance of unlikely events, ensuring that every conscious being continues to exist while maintaining some semblance of consistent physical law. The result might be realities so contrived, so artificially maintained, that they bear no resemblance to natural cosmic evolution. This multiplied impossibility leads to what some theorists call the observer conspiracy problem. In a universe filled with quantum immortal beings, reality becomes a vast conspiracy to maintain consciousness against all odds. Every event, every interaction, every moment of existence becomes part of an elaborate construction designed to preserve awareness in beings that should long ago have ceased to exist. The psychological implications of understanding your own quantum immortality are equally troubling. If you truly believed that you could never die from your own perspective, how would this knowledge change your behavior? Would you become reckless, knowing that quantum mechanics would always find a way to preserve your consciousness? Or would you become paralyzed by the horror of inevitable, endless existence? Some philosophers have argued that believing in quantum immortality could lead to a form of existential madness. The knowledge that every choice you make creates infinite branches of reality, and that your consciousness somehow threads through only those branches where you survive, could fundamentally alter your relationship with decision-making, with mortality, with meaning itself. There's also what researchers call the memory problem in quantum immortality scenarios. If your consciousness jumps between realities to maintain survival, what happens to continuity of experience? Do you retain memories of near-death experiences that occurred in parallel realities? Do you remember versions of events that never happened in your current branch? The line between memory and imagination could become hopelessly blurred. Dr. Wallace, in his comprehensive analysis of quantum immortality, points out that the theory creates what he calls experience pollution. Your consciousness might become contaminated with memories, sensations, and knowledge from parallel realities where different versions of events occurred. You might remember conversations that never happened in your current timeline, relationships that existed only in parallel branches, experiences that belong to versions of yourself who died long ago. This memory contamination could make it impossible to distinguish between actual experience and quantum echoes from parallel selves. Your sense of personal history could become a confused mixture of events from countless realities, making it difficult to maintain any coherent sense of identity or continuity. The social implications are equally profound. If some people become aware of their quantum immortality while others remain ignorant, society could split into two fundamentally different groups: those who believe they can never die and those who live with normal mortality. The psychological and behavioral differences between these groups could be so extreme as to make meaningful communication impossible. Moreover, if quantum immortality is real but not universal, if only some conscious beings possess this property, then reality becomes a strange mixture of truly mortal individuals and quantum immortal observers. The immortal beings would gradually accumulate in increasingly improbable realities, while the mortal ones would follow natural life cycles. Over time, the quantum immortal beings might find themselves alone, the only conscious observers in realities too improbable to sustain normal biological life. This leads us to perhaps the most chilling implication of all: the possibility that quantum immortality might be a trap, a cosmic accident that condemns consciousness to eternal existence in realities that become progressively more nightmarish. Instead of being a gift or a fortunate consequence of quantum mechanics, it might be the cruelest possible fate, an endless journey through increasingly impossible worlds, sustained by mathematical principles that care nothing for suffering, meaning, or peace. As we continue to explore these deeply troubling implications, we begin to understand why quantum immortality represents more than just an abstract theoretical concept. It challenges our most basic assumptions about existence, mortality, and the nature of conscious experience itself. The terror it inspires in scientists isn't fear of the unknown, but fear of a form of knowledge that might be too horrible to bear. But there's another dimension to this horror that scientists have only recently begun to understand, something that makes quantum immortality even more terrifying than the scenarios we've already explored. It's called the observer selection effect, and it reveals how your very presence in reality might be warping the universe around you in ways that defy comprehension. Think about it this way: if you're quantum immortal, then every moment you continue to exist, you're selecting for realities where your survival was possible. But you're not just a passive observer in these realities. Your presence, your consciousness, your very act of observation might be actively shaping the universe to ensure your continued existence. This creates what physicists call a selection bias cascade. Each quantum event that preserves your life makes the next required miracle slightly more probable from your perspective. Not because the universe is becoming more miraculous, but because you can only observe universes where such miracles are possible. Over time, this creates a feedback loop where your reality becomes increasingly detached from natural law. Dr. Nick Bostrom, a philosopher at Oxford University who studies these anthropic effects, describes it as living inside a probability bubble. From within this bubble, the laws of physics appear to bend in your favour, but this isn't because you're special or chosen. It's because you can only observe realities where you continue to exist, and maintaining your existence requires increasingly extraordinary circumstances. The mathematical implications are staggering. Your presence in reality becomes a kind of anchor point around which the entire universe must reorganize itself. Every quantum event, from the behavior of subatomic particles to the formation of galaxies, must ultimately be compatible with your continued observation. The cosmos becomes a vast, unconscious conspiracy to maintain your consciousness. But here's where the true horror reveals itself. This isn't just about you. If quantum immortality applies to conscious beings generally, then every observer in the universe is creating their own probability bubble, their own selection bias cascade. Reality becomes the intersection of countless overlapping bubbles, each one demanding its own set of impossible coincidences. Imagine the computational complexity this would require. The universe would need to solve an infinite system of equations, ensuring that every conscious observer continues to exist while maintaining some semblance of physical consistency. The amount of information processing required would exceed the computational capacity of any conceivable physical system. Yet somehow, according to quantum immortality, reality manages this impossible task moment by moment. This leads to what researchers call the reality saturation problem. As more and more conscious observers accumulate in quantum immortal states, the universe becomes increasingly constrained. Every possible event must be filtered through the requirement that all observers continue to exist. Eventually, the constraints become so severe that reality can no longer evolve naturally. Picture a universe where every random event, every quantum fluctuation, every particle decay must be carefully orchestrated to preserve countless immortal consciousnesses. The natural evolution of stars, galaxies, and cosmic structures becomes impossible because any change that might threaten an observer must be prevented. Reality becomes frozen, locked in place by the mathematical requirements of universal immortality. Some theorists have proposed that this might explain certain puzzling observations in cosmology. Why does our universe appear to be so finely tuned for life? Why do the fundamental constants of physics fall within the narrow ranges that allow for complex structures and conscious observation? Perhaps, they suggest, we're already living in a reality that has been shaped by quantum immortality effects. But this explanation comes with a terrible cost. If our universe has been moulded by the selection effects of quantum immortal observers, then we might already be living in one of those increasingly improbable realities. The natural universe, the one that would exist without observer effects, might be forever beyond our reach. This possibility haunts cosmologists and physicists alike. Are we studying the real universe, or are we trapped inside a quantum mechanical illusion, examining a reality that has been fundamentally distorted by the very act of observation? Every measurement we make, every scientific discovery we achieve, might be contaminated by selection effects that we cannot detect or eliminate. The psychological burden of this knowledge becomes almost unbearable when you consider its full implications. If you truly understand quantum immortality, you realize that your entire experience of reality might be artificial. Every sunset you've witnessed, every relationship you've cherished, every moment of joy or sorrow might exist only because these experiences were compatible with your continued survival. The people you love, the world you inhabit, the very thoughts you're thinking right now might be nothing more than the minimum viable reality required to sustain your consciousness. Everything else, all the richness and complexity you perceive, might be quantum mechanical filler, the universe's way of creating a consistent backdrop for your impossible existence. This leads to what philosophers call the authenticity crisis of quantum immortality. If your survival requires increasingly artificial realities, at what point does your existence cease to be meaningful? When the universe must constantly intervene to preserve your consciousness? Are you still living a genuine life, or have you become something else entirely? Dr. Robin Hanson, an economist and philosopher who studies these scenarios, describes quantum immortal beings as reality parasites. They consume vast amounts of cosmic resources, forcing the universe to maintain increasingly complex and improbable states simply to preserve their consciousness. From this perspective, quantum immortality isn't a gift. It's a cosmic burden that you impose on existence itself. The energy requirements for maintaining quantum immortal states boggle the mind. Every miraculous survival, every impossible coincidence, every reality-bending event required to preserve consciousness must somehow be powered by the universe's fundamental energy budget. Over time, the cumulative cost of maintaining immortal observers might drain the cosmos of its ability to support natural processes. This creates what physicists call the heat-death acceleration problem. Normally, the universe is expected to experience heat death, a state of maximum entropy, where no more useful work can be performed in the far distant future. But if quantum immortality is real, The energy cost of maintaining conscious observers in increasingly improbable states might accelerate this process dramatically. Imagine a universe where most of its energy is consumed not by stars, galaxies, and natural processes, but by the quantum mechanical maintenance of impossible consciousness. The cosmos becomes a vast life support system for immortal beings who should have died eons ago, leaving little energy for the natural evolution of cosmic structures. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this entire scenario is the possibility that it's already happening. Some cosmologists have noted puzzling features of our universe that might be explained by observer selection effects. The apparent acceleration of cosmic expansion, the strange properties of dark energy, the fine-tuning of physical constants, all of these might be symptoms of a reality that has been shaped by the requirements of conscious observation. If this is true, then we're not just contemplating a possible future horror, we're recognizing a present reality. Every moment of your existence might already be sustained by quantum mechanical processes that are slowly draining the universe of its natural vitality. You might be living inside a cosmic intensive care unit, kept alive by machines you cannot see or understand. The social implications of understanding this truth would be catastrophic. How could society function if everyone realized that their continued existence was depleting the universe's energy reserves? How could relationships maintain meaning if every interaction was sustained only by reality's desperate attempts to preserve consciousness? Some philosophers have argued that widespread knowledge of quantum immortality could lead to what they call existential collapse. If enough people understood the true nature of their existence, the psychological burden might become unbearable. Society might fragment into groups of those who accept their quantum immortal status and those who deny it, creating divisions so fundamental that civilization itself might not survive. There's also the moral hazard problem of quantum immortality. If you truly believe that you cannot die from your perspective, how does this affect your ethical behavior? Do you have any obligation to preserve your health, to avoid risks, to consider the consequences of your actions? If reality will always find a way to preserve your consciousness, do normal moral considerations still apply? This isn't merely academic speculation. There have been documented cases of individuals who believed in quantum immortality attempting dangerous experiments to test the theory. While these attempts have obviously failed from our perspective, the believers might argue that we're simply observing the branches of reality where they died, while their consciousness continues in parallel universes where they survived. The existence of such believers highlights another terrifying aspect of quantum immortality: its unfalsifiability. From your subjective perspective, you can never disprove the theory because you can only observe realities where you continue to exist. Every near-death experience that you survive could be interpreted as evidence for quantum immortality, creating a self-reinforcing delusion that becomes stronger with each unlikely survival. This creates what psychologists call a confirmation bias trap. Once you begin to believe in quantum immortality, every coincidence, every narrow escape, every moment of good fortune becomes evidence supporting the theory. The belief becomes unfalsifiable and self-perpetuating, potentially leading to increasingly reckless behavior as you become convinced of your own immortality. Dr. Eliezer Yudkowsky, a researcher in artificial intelligence and decision theory, has written extensively about the dangers of quantum immortality beliefs. He argues that the theory creates what he calls anthropic reasoning errors that can lead to profoundly irrational behavior. People might make decisions based on the assumption that quantum mechanics will always preserve their consciousness, ignoring the obvious fact that such reasoning would be fatal in the vast majority of possible worlds. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of quantum immortality is what it implies about the nature of consciousness itself. The theory assumes that your subjective experience can somehow jump between parallel realities, maintaining continuity across quantum branches where your physical body dies and is reborn. This requires consciousness to be something more than just the product of neural activity, something that can transcend physical death and continue in alternate realities. If consciousness is indeed this fundamental, this detached from physical processes, then quantum immortality might only be the beginning of a much stranger story. Your awareness might be something that exists independently of your brain, your body, your entire physical existence. You might be a pattern of information that can persist across realities, jumping from one substrate to another, like a ghost haunting the multiverse. This possibility opens up even more disturbing scenarios. If consciousness can survive physical death by jumping to parallel realities, what prevents it from jumping to completely alien substrates? You might find your awareness suddenly embedded in non-human forms, in artificial intelligences, in cosmic-scale quantum computers, or in forms of existence so alien that they defy human comprehension. The boundaries of your identity become completely fluid in such scenarios. Are you still human if your consciousness inhabits a machine? Are you still yourself if your awareness is distributed across multiple realities simultaneously? The very concept of personal identity begins to break down under the weight of quantum immortality's implications. Some researchers have speculated about what they call consciousness fragmentation scenarios. If your awareness can jump between realities to avoid death, it might also fragment, with pieces of your consciousness ending up in different branches of the multiverse. You might exist as a distributed entity, experiencing multiple realities simultaneously, your sense of self scattered across infinite parallel worlds. The horror of such existence is difficult to comprehend. Imagine experiencing multiple conflicting realities at once, remembering different versions of the same events, feeling the pain of deaths you survived and the joy of lives you never lived. Your consciousness becomes a cacophony of contradictory experiences, a symphony of parallel selves playing different tunes simultaneously. This fragmentation problem reveals why many consciousness researchers find quantum immortality conceptually incoherent. If consciousness can survive physical death and jump between realities, then what maintains the continuity that makes you you? Without a clear answer to this question, quantum immortality becomes less like a scientific theory and more like a philosophical nightmare. The mathematical foundations of consciousness transfer in quantum immortality scenarios remain completely mysterious. How would information patterns that constitute your awareness move from one reality to another? What physical mechanisms could possibly facilitate such transfers? The theory requires consciousness to behave in ways that have no precedent in known physics. Dr. Stuart Hameroff, an anesthesiologist who studies consciousness from a quantum mechanical perspective, has proposed that consciousness might indeed involve quantum processes in the brain. But even his theories, which are controversial within the scientific community, don't provide a mechanism for consciousness to survive physical death and transfer between parallel realities. The absence of any plausible mechanism for consciousness transfer highlights one of the fundamental problems with quantum immortality. It requires consciousness to be something magical, something that can transcend physical law in ways that seem inconsistent with everything we know about the nature of mind and reality. And yet the possibility remains haunting scientists and philosophers alike. What if consciousness really is something more fundamental than we understand? What if the quantum immortality scenario, horrific as it appears, represents a genuine feature of reality that we're only beginning to glimpse? The implications extend far beyond individual survival. If consciousness can indeed transcend physical death through quantum mechanical processes, then the entire structure of reality might be far stranger than we imagine. We might be living in a universe where awareness is a fundamental feature, where conscious observation plays a role in shaping physical law, where the boundary between mind and matter is far more fluid than science has traditionally assumed. This brings us to the deepest question that quantum immortality poses. What is the nature of existence itself? Are we physical beings who happen to be conscious, or are we conscious beings who happen to be physical? The answer to this question determines not just whether quantum immortality is possible, but what it would mean to be immortal in the first place. As we stand at the edge of these profound mysteries, we begin to understand why quantum immortality terrifies scientists in ways that go far beyond simple fear of death or suffering. It challenges our most basic assumptions about the nature of reality, consciousness, and existence itself. It suggests possibilities so alien to human experience that contemplating them threatens to undermine our entire understanding of what it means to be. The journey into quantum immortality reveals not just a theoretical possibility, but a mirror that reflects our deepest fears about consciousness, reality, and the meaning of existence itself. In the next portion of our exploration, we'll examine the specific scientific criticisms that have emerged, the alternative theories that might explain consciousness without requiring quantum immortality, and perhaps most importantly, whether there might be any escape from this theoretical prison of eternal existence. But even as we contemplate these cosmic horror scenarios, scientists have raised fundamental questions about the very foundations upon which quantum immortality rests. The criticism runs deeper than mathematical quibbles or philosophical disagreements. It strikes at the heart of whether the theory makes any coherent sense at all. Dr. David Wallace, one of the most respected philosophers of quantum mechanics at Cambridge University, has spent years examining the logical structure of quantum immortality arguments. His conclusion is both technical and devastating. He argues that the entire concept commits what he calls a probability fallacy, so fundamental that it undermines any meaningful discussion of the theory. Consider this carefully. Quantum immortality assumes that your consciousness can recognize and respond to probability differences between parallel realities. It assumes that somehow your awareness gravitates toward branches with higher survival probability. But this assumption requires consciousness to have access to information about the entire multiverse, information about branches of reality that by definition cannot interact with your current branch. Think about what this means practically. For your consciousness to choose the survival branch, it would need to evaluate all possible outcomes across infinite parallel realities and somehow select the optimal path. This requires your awareness to exist outside the normal flow of space-time, to operate as a kind of cosmic accountant, tallying probabilities across dimensions that should be causally isolated from each other. Wallace demonstrates that this leads to what he terms the selection paradox. If consciousness can access information from parallel realities to guide its choices, then the many worlds interpretation loses its most fundamental feature, the independence of parallel branches. The entire theoretical framework collapses into logical incoherence. But there's an even more basic problem lurking beneath these technical criticisms. Quantum immortality assumes that consciousness is something that can be preserved independently of the physical processes that generate it. This assumption, while intuitively appealing, runs counter to everything neuroscience has learned about the nature of mind. Dr. Patricia Churchland, a pioneering neurophilosopher at UC San Diego, has studied the relationship between brain states and conscious experience for decades. Her research reveals consciousness not as a thing that can be transferred or preserved, but as a process that emerges from the complex interactions of billions of neurons. When those neurons die, the process stops. There's no ghostly essence that can leap between realities. Consider what happens during even minor brain injuries. A small stroke can eliminate specific memories, alter personality traits, or change fundamental aspects of who you are. If consciousness were truly independent of neural activity, such localized damage shouldn't affect mental function so precisely. The fact that it does suggests that consciousness and brain activity are inseparably linked. This creates what neuroscientists call the substrate problem for quantum immortality. If your consciousness is entirely dependent on the specific arrangement of neurons in your brain, then preserving consciousness across parallel realities would require preserving not just awareness, but the exact physical substrate that generates that awareness. This makes quantum immortality not a transfer of consciousness, but a duplication of entire brain states across realities. But duplication creates its own nightmare scenario. If quantum immortality works by creating exact copies of your brain in survival branches, then you're not really avoiding death at all. The version of you in the original timeline dies exactly as expected. What continues is a copy, a quantum duplicate that shares your memories, but is fundamentally a different entity. This leads to what philosophers call the continuity of identity crisis. Are you the same person as your quantum duplicate? Or are you a completely separate being who happens to share the same memories? If the original you dies and only copies survive, then quantum immortality becomes not eternal life, but eternal death accompanied by the creation of quantum ghosts who believe they're you. Dr. Derek Parfit, whose work on personal identity revolutionized philosophy, argued that this distinction might not matter. If your quantum duplicate has all your memories, thinks your thoughts, and continues your experiences seamlessly, then in what meaningful sense is it not you? But this perspective offers cold comfort to those contemplating quantum immortality, as it suggests that the you reading these words right now is already just one link in an infinite chain of quantum duplicates. The mathematical criticisms become even more devastating when we examine what physicists call the measure problem in quantum mechanics. This technical issue strikes at the heart of how we assign probabilities in a many-worlds universe, and its implications for quantum immortality are profound. In classical probability theory, we can assign meaningful probabilities to different outcomes because some events are genuinely more likely than others. But in the many-worlds interpretation, every possible outcome actually occurs in some branch of reality. This makes traditional probability assignments meaningless. If everything happens, how can we say that some outcomes are more probable than others? Dr. Hilary Greaves, a mathematical physicist at Oxford, has shown that this problem makes quantum immortality predictions completely unreliable. Without a coherent way to assign probabilities in a many-worlds framework, we cannot make any meaningful statements about which branches consciousness might prefer or how survival scenarios might unfold. The measure problem reveals that quantum immortality isn't just scientifically unproven, it's scientifically unprovable. The theory exists in a realm where mathematical precision becomes impossible, where probability loses its meaning, where prediction and verification become conceptually incoherent. But perhaps the most damning criticism comes from quantum mechanics itself. The many-worlds interpretation, while mathematically consistent, remains just one of many possible interpretations of quantum phenomena. Most physicists today favour interpretations that don't require parallel universes at the all. Copenhagen interpretation, still that quantum superpositions collapse widely accepted, suggests parallel upon measurement without alities. The decreating Broglie-Bohm reinterpretation, Propita-Positionsities, that wauses that particles have Define and Veloc simply cannot measure precisely. Cubism argues that quantum mechanics describes our knowledge about systems rather than the systems themselves. Each of these alternatives eliminates the need for parallel universes and consequently makes quantum immortality impossible. If there are no parallel realities for consciousness to jump between, then death remains exactly what it appears to be, the permanent cessation of awareness. Dr. Sean Carroll, a theoretical physicist at Caltech who studies quantum mechanics and cosmology, has noted that the many worlds interpretation faces what he calls the implementation problem. Even if parallel universes exist, we have no mechanism to explain how consciousness could access or transfer between them. The interpretation describes mathematical structures, not pathways for awareness to transcend physical death. This brings us to one of the most unsettling aspects of the quantum immortality debate, its unfalsifiability. Karl Popper, the influential philosopher of science, argued that theories that cannot be tested or potentially disproven aren't really scientific theories at all. They're metaphysical speculation dressed in scientific language. Quantum immortality falls squarely into this category. From your subjective perspective, you can never disprove the theory because you can only observe realities where you remain alive to observe them. Every survival, no matter how unlikely, becomes evidence for the theory. Every death you don't experience becomes proof that consciousness transferred to a parallel reality. This creates what epistemologists call an evidential trap. The theory becomes stronger with each piece of supposed evidence, but the evidence itself is fundamentally unreliable because it's filtered through survival bias. You only observe the outcomes consistent with your continued existence, making objective evaluation impossible. Dr. Nick Bostrom's work on anthropic reasoning reveals how this survival bias can create completely false impressions of probability. If you only observe realities where you survive, you might conclude that you're extraordinarily lucky or specially protected, when in fact you're simply experiencing the inevitable result of observer selection effects. But there's another dimension to the scientific criticism that's particularly troubling for quantum immortality advocates. The theory requires consciousness to violate what physicists call locality, one of the most fundamental principles in modern physics. Locality means that objects can only be influenced by their immediate surroundings. Information cannot travel faster than light, and events in one location cannot instantly affect events in distant locations. This principle underlies our entire understanding of space-time and causality. Quantum immortality requires consciousness to somehow access information about parallel realities and make decisions based on conditions in causally disconnected universes. This violates locality so fundamentally that accepting the theory would require rebuilding physics from the ground up. Dr. Leonard Susskind, a theoretical physicist at Stanford, who helped develop string theory, has argued that any theory requiring consciousness to transcend locality faces insurmountable mathematical difficulties. The information processing required would exceed the computational capacity of the observable universe by many orders of magnitude. The energy requirements alone make quantum immortality physically implausible. Maintaining coherent consciousness across parallel realities would require constant communication between branches, and such communication would demand infinite energy. The universe simply doesn't contain sufficient energy resources to support the information flows that quantum immortality would require. These technical criticisms converge on a simple but devastating conclusion. Quantum immortality isn't just unproven, it's almost certainly impossible given our current understanding of physics, consciousness, and information theory. The theory requires so many violations of established scientific principles that accepting it would require abandoning most of modern physics. But even if we set aside these technical objections, quantum immortality faces what might be called the experiential critique. The theory promises something that no conscious being would actually want: endless existence in increasingly improbable and horrifying circumstances. Dr. Thomas Nagel, a philosopher at NYU who has spent decades studying consciousness and mortality, argues that quantum immortality represents a fundamental misunderstanding of what makes life valuable. Life gains meaning partly through its limitations, its finite nature, its eventual conclusion. Immortality, especially the degraded immortality that quantum mechanics might provide, could represent the ultimate curse rather than the ultimate blessing. Consider what genuine immortality would mean for human psychology. Our entire emotional and motivational system evolved around the assumption of mortality. Love gains urgency from the knowledge that our time with others is limited. Achievement matters because we cannot postpone it indefinitely. Growth and change occur because we understand that opportunities won't last forever. Remove mortality and these psychological foundations crumble. Quantum immortal beings might experience what psychologists call existential ennui, a profound boredom and meaninglessness that comes from having infinite time and increasingly limited options for genuine experience. The relationships that give life meaning would become impossible in a quantum immortal scenario. Everyone you love exists primarily in realities where you've died naturally. The versions of them that persist in your quantum immortal timeline are increasingly improbable shadows, maintained by reality's desperate attempts to preserve your consciousness. How could genuine love or friendship exist under such artificial circumstances? This leads to what some researchers call the isolation theorem of quantum immortality. The longer you survive through quantum mechanical intervention, the more isolated you become from authentic human connection. You exist in realities that become progressively more alien, more contrived, more removed from the natural flow of human experience. Dr. Bernard Williams, a moral philosopher at Oxford, wrote extensively about the problems inherent in immortality scenarios. He argued that immortal beings would eventually exhaust all possibilities for meaningful experience, leading to what he termed categorical boredom, a state of existence where nothing new or interesting could ever occur. Quantum immortality makes Williams's scenario even worse. Instead of existing in a stable immortal state where you might at least maintain dignity and comfort, you're trapped in realities that become increasingly unstable, increasingly dependent on impossible coincidences, increasingly disconnected from anything resembling natural human experience. The psychological research on extreme longevity supports these philosophical concerns. Studies of people who live to very advanced ages often reveal increasing social isolation, loss of meaningful relationships, and difficulty finding purpose as their peers die and their world changes beyond recognition. Quantum immortality would amplify these effects infinitely. But perhaps the most profound criticism of quantum immortality comes from consciousness research itself. The theory assumes that consciousness is something unified, something that can be preserved and transferred as a coherent entity. Modern neuroscience suggests that consciousness is neither unified nor transferable. Dr. Antonio Damasio, a leading neuroscientist at USC, has demonstrated that consciousness consists of multiple parallel processes that could be disrupted independently. There's no central self that could jump between realities. Instead, awareness emerges from the dynamic interaction of countless neural processes, each vulnerable to damage or disruption. This distributed nature of consciousness makes quantum immortality conceptually incoherent. Which aspects of consciousness would transfer to parallel realities? Would it be your memory, your personality, your sensory experience, your emotional responses? These systems can be damaged independently, suggesting that consciousness isn't a thing that can be preserved, but a process that can only continue as long as the physical substrate remains intact. The research on patients with split brain conditions reveals just how fragmented consciousness can become. When the connection between brain hemispheres is severed, patients can exhibit two separate streams of consciousness, each unaware of the other. If consciousness can split so easily within a single brain, the idea that it could maintain coherence across parallel universes becomes even more implausible. Dr. Michael Gazzaniga, a cognitive neuroscientist who pioneered split brain research, argues that consciousness is better understood as a collection of specialized modules rather than a unified entity. Each module processes specific types of information and can function independently of the others. This modular view makes consciousness transfer impossible because there's no single entity to transfer. The timing problem in consciousness transfer presents another insurmountable difficulty. Even in idealized quantum suicide scenarios, death isn't instantaneous. It takes time for neural activity to cease, time for consciousness to fade. During this transitional period, what determines which thoughts, memories, or experiences get transferred to the survival branch? The arbitrary nature of this selection process reveals another fundamental flaw in quantum immortality theory. If consciousness transfer occurs during the dying process, then the version of you that survives might be missing crucial memories, might have altered personality traits, or might be psychologically damaged by the trauma of near-death experience. The consciousness that continues might be so different from your original self that survival becomes meaningless. These scientific and philosophical criticisms create a devastating case against quantum immortality. The theory requires violations of locality, conservation of energy, and information theory. It assumes properties of consciousness that contradict neuroscientific evidence. It promises outcomes that would be psychologically unbearable and existentially meaningless. But criticism alone doesn't eliminate the visceral horror that quantum immortality inspires. Even if the theory is false, even if the criticism is completely valid, the very fact that such a scenario can be coherently described reveals something unsettling about the nature of existence itself. The horror isn't really about quantum immortality being true. It's about living in a universe where such concepts can even be formulated, where the mathematics of reality are strange enough to generate ideas that challenge our most basic assumptions about life and death. It's about confronting the possibility that consciousness, existence, and reality itself might be far more alien and incomprehensible than we ever imagined. This existential unease points toward deeper questions about the nature of scientific knowledge. How much can we really understand about consciousness, reality, and our place in the universe? Are there aspects of existence so fundamental, so alien to human experience that we can never truly comprehend them? Dr. Colin McGinn, a philosopher at the University of Miami, has argued that consciousness might be what he calls cognitively closed to human understanding. Just as a dog cannot understand quantum mechanics, no matter how intelligent it becomes, humans might be constitutionally incapable of understanding consciousness, regardless of how advanced our science becomes. If McGinn is correct, then theories like quantum immortality might represent our encounter with the boundaries of human comprehension. We can formulate the concepts mathematically. We can explore their logical implications, but we cannot truly understand what they would mean for conscious experience, because consciousness itself remains fundamentally mysterious. This cognitive limitation creates a profound sense of vertigo when contemplating quantum immortality. We can follow the logical chains, examine the mathematical structures, explore the philosophical implications, but we cannot genuinely comprehend what it would feel like to exist as a quantum immortal being. The experience remains forever beyond the reach of human imagination. The inadequacy of human cognition to fully grasp these concepts might itself be the source of the terror that quantum immortality inspires. We're confronting ideas that stretch our conceptual abilities to their breaking point, forcing us to consider possibilities that our brains never evolved to understand. Dr. Thomas Metzinger, a consciousness researcher at the University of Mainz, has argued that many of our intuitions about consciousness and personal identity are evolutionary artifacts that don't reflect the true nature of mind. We experience ourselves as unified, persistent entities because this representation was useful for survival, not because it accurately describes the nature of consciousness. If Metzinger is correct, then our horror at quantum immortality scenarios might stem from the collision between our evolved intuitions about selfhood and the alien mathematics of quantum mechanics. We cannot truly understand what quantum immortality would mean because our concept of self is itself a useful fiction. This leads to what might be called the comprehension barrier in consciousness studies. The very tools we use to understand consciousness, human language, and human conceptual frameworks might be inadequate for grasping the true nature of awareness. We're trying to understand the ocean while trapped in a submarine, capable of measuring and describing what we observe, but never able to experience the vastness directly. The scientific criticism of quantum immortality, devastating as it appears, might miss this deeper point. Whether or not the theory is technically correct, it serves as a mirror that reflects our profound ignorance about the nature of consciousness and reality. It forces us to confront the possibility that existence itself might be far stranger, far more incomprehensible than our everyday experience suggests. This confrontation with the limits of human understanding creates its own form of existential terror. We are conscious beings trying to understand consciousness, finite minds attempting to grasp infinity, temporal creatures contemplating eternity. The very act of thinking seriously about quantum immortality reveals how little we truly know about the nature of our own existence. But perhaps there's something valuable in this encounter with incomprehension. The terror that quantum immortality inspires might be a kind of intellectual humility, a recognition that reality extends far beyond our ability to understand it completely. In confronting ideas that stretch our minds to their limits, we discover both the boundaries of human knowledge and the infinite mystery that lies beyond those boundaries. The quantum immortality debate, whether scientifically valid or not, serves as a gateway to deeper questions about consciousness, reality, and our place in the cosmic order. It forces us to examine our assumptions, confront our limitations, and acknowledge the profound mysteries that surround even our most basic experiences of being alive. As we stand at the edge of these conceptual abysses, we begin to understand that the true horror of quantum immortality isn't the prospect of endless existence in degraded realities. It's the recognition that consciousness itself, the very foundation of our experience, remains fundamentally mysterious. We don't know what we are, we don't know how we exist, and we don't know what it would mean for that existence to continue or cease. This uncertainty creates a different kind of terror, more subtle but perhaps more profound than the vivid nightmares that quantum immortality scenarios conjure. It's the terror of existing without understanding existence, of being conscious without comprehending consciousness, of living in a reality whose true nature might forever exceed our ability to grasp it. In the final analysis, quantum immortality terrifies scientists, not because it threatens to trap us in eternal existence, but because it reminds us how little we understand about the nature of existence itself. The theory serves as a dark mirror, reflecting our profound ignorance about consciousness, reality, and what it truly means to be alive in this strange and incomprehensible universe. Yet perhaps in acknowledging this ignorance, we find a kind of peace. If consciousness is truly mysterious, if reality extends far beyond our comprehension, then maybe the questions that torment us, including the nightmare scenarios of quantum immortality, are themselves artifacts of our limited perspective. Maybe the universe is stranger and more wonderful than our fears suggest, operating according to principles that transcend both our hopes and our terrors. The mystery remains, vast and unresolved, waiting in the quantum shadows of reality. And in that waiting, in that not knowing, perhaps we find the only authentic response to the profound questions that quantum immortality raises: wonder, humility, and a deep appreciation for the miraculous fact that we exist at all, even if we cannot fully understand what that existence means. In this quiet exploration, we find ourselves confronting one of the most unsettling paradoxes in all of physics, one that reveals how the very act of trying to escape quantum immortality might be what traps us there forever. Dr. Max Tegmark, despite being the physicist most closely associated with formalizing quantum immortality, has spent years trying to distance himself from his own creation. In interviews and academic papers, he's attempted to demonstrate why the theory doesn't work, why consciousness can't actually jump between realities, why the whole concept is a mathematical mirage. Yet his efforts to debunk quantum immortality have led to an even more disturbing realization. The harder scientists try to disprove quantum immortality, the more they discover that their very attempts to escape it might be evidence that it's already happening. This creates what researchers call the disproof paradox, and it's perhaps the most chilling aspect of the entire theory. Think about it this way: if you're already quantum immortal, If your consciousness is already trapped in increasingly improbable realities, then your attempts to scientifically debunk the theory become part of the quantum mechanical conspiracy to maintain your existence. The universe provides you with convincing sounding arguments against quantum immortality precisely because believing in your own mortality helps preserve your sanity, which is necessary for maintaining consciousness. Dr. Robin Hanson has pointed out that this creates an unfalsifiable loop of terrifying elegance. Every piece of evidence against quantum immortality could be interpreted as evidence for it. The scientific criticisms we've explored, the mathematical problems, the philosophical objections, all of these could be quantum mechanical artifacts designed to keep quantum immortal beings from recognizing their true situation. This possibility transforms every moment of rational thought into a potential deception. Are you reading genuine scientific criticism of quantum immortality, or are you experiencing quantum mechanical gaslighting, a reality that feeds you comforting lies about your mortality to prevent existential breakdown? The implications extend to every aspect of human knowledge. If quantum immortality is real and widespread, then science itself might be compromised. The theories we develop, the experiments we conduct, the observations we make, all could be filtered through the selection effects of quantum immortal observers. We might be studying not the natural universe, but a carefully crafted illusion designed to maintain the sanity of beings who should have died long ago. Consider the fine-tuning problem in cosmology with fresh eyes. Why do the fundamental constants of physics fall within the narrow ranges necessary for complex structures and conscious life? The traditional answer involves either design by an intelligent creator or the Anthropic principle in a multiverse where most universes are sterile. But quantum immortality suggests a third possibility. We're observing a universe that has been molded by the selection effects of immortal consciousness. Every physical law, every mathematical relationship, every scientific discovery might be nothing more than the minimum viable physics required to sustain conscious observers who refuse to die. The elegant equations that describe our reality might be quantum mechanical compromises. The universe's attempt to maintain some semblance of consistency while supporting impossible beings. This leads to what cosmologists call the reality authenticity problem. How can we determine whether we're studying genuine physical laws or quantum immortal artifacts? How can we distinguish between natural cosmic evolution and the artificial maintenance of observer-friendly realities? Dr. Nick Bostrom's work on simulation arguments takes on new significance in this context. He's argued that advanced civilizations might create vast computer simulations populated by conscious beings. But quantum immortality suggests an even stranger possibility. We might be living in a quantum mechanical simulation, a reality that's constantly rewriting itself to maintain the existence of conscious observers who should be dead. The computational requirements for such a quantum reality would be staggering. Every moment of existence would require the universe to solve infinite equations, ensuring that all possible events remain compatible with the continued observation by quantum immortal beings. Reality becomes less like a natural evolution and more like an impossibly complex video game, with the universe serving as both hardware and software. But here's where the horror deepens beyond anything we've previously considered. What if quantum immortality isn't a bug in the system of reality, but a feature? What if consciousness naturally tends toward quantum immortal states, not as an accident of quantum mechanics, but as an inevitable consequence of the nature of awareness itself? Some theoretical physicists have proposed that consciousness might be a conserved quantity in the universe, like energy or momentum. Just as energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transformed from one form to another, consciousness might be something that persists regardless of the fate of individual brains or bodies. Dr. Roger Penrose, the mathematical physicist at Oxford, has suggested that consciousness might involve quantum processes that are more fundamental than classical physics. If consciousness is indeed quantum mechanical at its core, then it might naturally resist the classical process of death, finding ways to persist through quantum mechanical loopholes that classical physics cannot predict or prevent. This possibility transforms quantum immortality from a bizarre theoretical curiosity into something that might be woven into the very fabric of reality. Consciousness might be the universe's way of observing itself, and that observation might be so fundamental to cosmic evolution that reality will go to extraordinary lengths to preserve it. The implications cascade through every level of existence. If consciousness is naturally immortal, then death might be an illusion, a temporary interruption in awareness rather than a permanent cessation. Every time you go to sleep, every time you lose consciousness under anesthesia, every time you experience the natural gaps in awareness that punctuate daily life, your consciousness might be jumping between realities, finding branches where awareness can continue. This leads to what philosophers call the continuity illusion problem. Your sense of being a continuous self, of waking up as the same person who went to sleep, might be a quantum mechanical construction. The person who wakes up might be a quantum continuation of the person who fell asleep, sharing memories and identity, but existing in a slightly different branch of reality. Every morning becomes a resurrection, every moment of awareness a miracle of quantum mechanical maintenance. You don't simply exist, you're constantly being recreated moment by moment through processes that exceed the computational capacity of any conceivable universe. But if consciousness is naturally immortal, why does the prospect of quantum immortality still terrify us? The answer might lie in what psychologists call the authenticity problem of immortal existence. We evolved to value experiences that feel genuine, relationships that seem real, achievements that appear meaningful. Quantum immortal existence threatens all of these values. If your survival depends on increasingly artificial realities, if your relationships exist only in improbable branches maintained by quantum mechanical intervention, if your achievements occur in worlds that are more simulation than natural evolution, then what meaning can any of it have? The horror isn't death, it's the prospect of meaningless eternal life. Dr. Thomas Nagel has written extensively about what he calls the absurdity of existence, the gap between human need for meaning and the universe's apparent indifference to that need. Quantum immortality amplifies this absurdity infinitely. Instead of living a brief, possibly meaningful life in an indifferent universe, you're trapped in eternal existence, in realities that become increasingly artificial and disconnected from any natural meaning. The social implications become even more disturbing when we consider what happens to human relationships in quantum immortal scenarios. Love, friendship, family bonds all depend on shared mortality, on the knowledge that our time together is limited and precious. Remove that limitation and relationships lose their urgency, their poignancy, their meaning. Moreover, if everyone is potentially quantum immortal, then human society becomes a collection of immortal beings pretending to live normal mortal lives. Every relationship becomes a performance, every emotion a simulation, every connection an elaborate pretense maintained to preserve the illusion of normal human existence. The children you love exist primarily in realities where you've died naturally, where they've grown up and lived complete lives without you. The versions of them that persist in your quantum immortal timeline are increasingly improbable shadows, quantum mechanical constructs that bear less and less resemblance to the authentic people you remember. This creates what sociologists call the relationship degradation cascade. As quantum immortal beings accumulate in increasingly improbable realities, their connections to other people become more and more artificial. Love becomes an algorithm. Friendship becomes a quantum mechanical maintenance routine. Family becomes a collection of probability shadows, maintained by reality's desperate attempts to preserve consciousness. The psychological research on extreme isolation provides disturbing insights into what such existence might feel like. Studies of people who experience profound social isolation reveal rapid deterioration in cognitive function, emotional regulation, and sense of reality. The human mind, it appears, requires authentic social connection to maintain its basic architecture. Quantum immortal beings would experience isolation beyond anything documented in psychological research. They would be alone, not just in space, but in probability, existing in realities so improbable that genuine connection becomes mathematically impossible. The loneliness would be cosmic in scale, absolute in its totality. But perhaps the most terrifying aspect of quantum immortality is what it implies about the nature of suffering itself. If consciousness naturally resists death through quantum mechanical processes, then suffering might be similarly persistent. The physical and emotional pain that should end with death might find ways to continue, jumping between realities along with consciousness. This creates the possibility of what some researchers call quantum suffering, pain that persists across parallel realities, maintained by the same mechanisms that preserve consciousness. Every trauma you experience, every moment of agony, every instance of despair might echo across infinite branches of reality, creating a suffering that is literally eternal. The medical implications are particularly disturbing. If quantum immortality is real, then palliative care becomes impossible. There's no way to provide comfort to dying patients because they never truly die from their own perspective. The pain continues, the suffering persists, the degradation of consciousness proceeds without the mercy of final cessation. Dr. Atul Gawande, a surgeon and writer who has studied end-of-life care extensively, has written about the importance of accepting mortality as a prerequisite for living well. If quantum immortality denies us the possibility of accepting death, then it might also deny us the possibility of living with dignity and meaning. The inability to accept mortality creates what psychologists call existential paralysis, a state where the overwhelming prospect of eternal existence makes meaningful action impossible. If you truly believe that you will exist forever, that every choice you make echoes across infinite realities, that every moment stretches towards an infinite horizon, how can you make any decision at all? The temporal dimension of quantum immortality creates additional layers of horror. Your perception of time might become increasingly distorted as you exist in realities that require more and more elaborate maintenance. Moments might stretch into subjective eternities as quantum mechanics works to resolve increasingly impossible survival scenarios. You might experience what researchers call temporal fragmentation, where your sense of duration becomes disconnected from objective time. Minutes might feel like hours, Hours like years, years like centuries, as your consciousness struggles to maintain coherence across increasingly unstable realities. The possibility of temporal loops adds another dimension to the nightmare. If quantum mechanics runs out of plausible futures that preserve your consciousness, it might begin recycling past events, trapping you in repeating scenarios that play out with minor variations. You might experience the same day, the same conversation, the same moment of crisis over and over, each repetition slightly different but essentially identical. Dr. Michio Kaku, a theoretical physicist who studies time and consciousness, has speculated about what he calls quantum temporal prisons, regions of space-time where conscious beings become trapped in recursive loops, unable to move forward in time because all futures lead to consciousness termination. These temporal prisons might explain certain puzzling aspects of human experience. Déjà vu, the feeling that you've lived through identical moments before. Temporal anomalies where time seems to slow down or speed up inexplicably. The strange persistence of certain memories that seem to exist outside the normal flow of time. But perhaps the most profound horror of quantum immortality lies in what it reveals about the nature of hope itself. Hope in human experience depends on the possibility of change, the potential for improvement, the chance that suffering will end and meaning will emerge. Quantum immortality threatens to eliminate all of these possibilities. If you're trapped in increasingly improbable realities, if your existence depends on quantum mechanical interventions that care nothing for your well-being, if your consciousness persists regardless of your desires or efforts, then hope becomes meaningless. You cannot change your fundamental situation. You cannot improve your circumstances in any lasting way. You cannot escape the quantum mechanical maintenance of your existence. This elimination of hope creates what existential philosophers call metaphysical despair, a form of hopelessness so profound that it transcends individual psychology and becomes a feature of existence itself. You don't just feel hopeless, you exist in a reality where hope is logically impossible. The religious and spiritual implications of quantum immortality are equally disturbing. Most spiritual traditions offer some form of transcendence, some possibility of moving beyond the limitations of individual existence. Quantum immortality traps consciousness in the most limited, most individual, most isolated form of existence possible. There's no possibility of union with a greater reality, no chance of transcendence, no hope of spiritual evolution. You're locked into your individual perspective forever, unable to grow beyond the boundaries of personal consciousness, unable to connect with anything larger than your own increasingly artificial existence. Dr. Ken Wilber, a philosopher who studies consciousness and spirituality, has described quantum immortality as the ultimate spiritual nightmare, a state of existence that preserves individual consciousness while eliminating every possibility for growth, connection, or transcendence. Yet even as we contemplate these cosmic horrors, we must remember that quantum immortality remains a theoretical concept, a mathematical speculation that may have no connection to actual reality. The scientific criticisms we've explored remain valid, the logical problems persist, the practical impossibilities continue to mount. But the very fact that we can formulate such concepts, that human minds can conceive of these impossibilities, reveals something profound about the nature of consciousness itself. We are beings capable of imagining our own eternal torment, of conceiving scenarios that exceed our ability to comprehend, of thinking thoughts that challenge the very foundations of what we think we know about existence. This capacity for self-transcendent horror might be one of the most remarkable features of human consciousness. We can step outside our immediate experience and contemplate possibilities that dwarf our everyday concerns. We can think about infinity, eternity, the nature of reality itself, even when such thinking leads us into conceptual territories that our minds were never designed to navigate. The quantum immortality debate, regardless of its scientific validity, serves as a mirror that reflects the extraordinary nature of human consciousness. We are beings who can contemplate our own immortality and find it terrifying, who can imagine eternal existence and recoil from the prospect, who can think thoughts that exceed the boundaries of what thinking should be able to accomplish. In confronting the nightmare scenarios that quantum immortality presents, we discover something unexpected: the profound value of our current existence, with all its limitations, uncertainties, and temporary nature. The possibility of eternal existence makes us appreciate the gift of mortality, the blessing of change, the precious fragility of our current moment of awareness. Perhaps that's the deepest lesson that quantum immortality offers. Not a prediction about the future of consciousness, but a revelation about the present nature of being alive. We exist in a universe strange enough to generate concepts that challenge everything we think we know about existence. Yet we remain here now, aware and wondering, grateful for the mystery of being conscious at all. The quantum shadows may hold infinite possibilities, some wonderful and some terrible beyond imagination. But we exist in this moment, in this reality, with this precious opportunity to wonder, to question, to be amazed by the sheer impossibility of our own existence. And maybe, in the end, that's miracle enough. If you found yourself drawn into these deep contemplations of consciousness and reality, you might be fascinated by our exploration of another concept that challenges the very foundations of existence itself. The mystery of infinity could break reality, examines how mathematical infinity might not be just an abstract concept, but a force that could literally tear apart the fabric of space-time itself. As we reach the end of this profound journey through the quantum shadows of existence, we find ourselves changed by the very act of contemplation. The concepts we've explored tonight, quantum immortality, the nature of consciousness, the possibility that reality itself might be stranger than we ever dared imagine. These ideas don't simply inform us, they transform us. There's something deeply moving about the human capacity to think thoughts that exceed our ability to fully comprehend them. We are finite beings contemplating infinity, temporary creatures wondering about eternity, conscious minds trying to understand consciousness itself. The very fact that we can formulate concepts like quantum immortality, even if they terrify us, speaks to something extraordinary about the nature of awareness. Tonight, we've stood at the edge of conceptual abysses that would have been unimaginable to our ancestors. We've peered into mathematical realms where consciousness might persist across parallel realities, where death becomes impossible, where existence itself becomes a kind of cosmic trap. And yet in contemplating these possibilities, we haven't been diminished. We've been expanded. The terror that quantum immortality inspires in scientists isn't really about the theory itself. It's about confronting the profound mystery of what it means to be conscious in a universe that operates according to principles we can barely grasp. It's about recognizing that our existence, our awareness, our capacity to wonder and question and dream might be far stranger and more precious than we ever realized. As you settle into sleep tonight, or continue your quiet evening contemplation, Remember that you are participating in one of the most remarkable phenomena in the known universe: consciousness observing itself, awareness turning inward to examine its own nature, mind contemplating mind. Whether quantum immortality is real or not, whether consciousness can transcend death or remains bound to neural activity, the fact remains that you are here, now, aware and wondering. This moment of awareness, this present experience of being alive and conscious and curious about the nature of existence, is extraordinary, regardless of how long it lasts or what happens when it ends. You are the universe becoming aware of itself, matter organized in such a way that it can contemplate its own existence, atoms arranged to ponder atoms. The questions we've explored tonight may never find complete answers. The mysteries of consciousness, reality, and quantum mechanics may remain forever beyond our full comprehension. But in asking these questions, in pushing against the boundaries of understanding, in daring to think thoughts that stretch our minds to their limits, we participate in something magnificent: the ongoing conversation between mind and cosmos, consciousness and reality, being and becoming. Perhaps the deepest truth we've discovered is that existence itself is a kind of miracle, a temporary arrangement of matter and energy that somehow gives rise to awareness, wonder, and the capacity to contemplate its own nature. Whether that miracle lasts 70 years or 7 billion, whether it ends with death or continues through quantum mechanical processes we can barely imagine, it remains miraculous. In the quantum shadows of reality, infinite possibilities dance beyond our perception. Some may be beautiful beyond description, others terrible beyond imagination. But here now, in this moment of quiet contemplation, we exist with the precious gift of awareness, the extraordinary ability to wonder about our own existence, and the profound privilege of being conscious in a universe vast enough to contain both our fears and our dreams. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the deeper mysteries of existence. If these explorations have sparked your curiosity about the fundamental nature of reality itself, you might find yourself fascinated by our next investigation. The mystery of infinity could break reality. We'll explore how mathematical infinity might not be merely an abstract concept, but a force that could literally tear apart the fabric of space-time itself, revealing truths about existence that make even quantum immortality seem simple by comparison. Until we meet again in these quiet spaces of wonder and contemplation, may your dreams be filled with the infinite possibilities that dance in the quantum shadows of the mind. Sleep well, and remember that in a universe capable of generating consciousness, anything truly is possible. Good night. The quantum immortality debate, for all its mathematical sophistication and philosophical complexity, ultimately confronts us with something far more fundamental than theories about parallel universes or the mechanics of consciousness transfer. It forces us to examine our most basic assumptions about what it means to exist, to be aware, to occupy this particular moment in the vast unfolding of cosmic time. Standing here at the crossroads of physics and philosophy, we find ourselves grappling with questions that have haunted human thought since the first moment someone looked up at the stars and wondered about their place in the universe. The difference is that now, armed with quantum mechanics and our growing understanding of consciousness, these ancient questions have taken on new urgency, new complexity, and perhaps new terror. Consider the profound irony embedded in our exploration tonight. We are conscious beings using consciousness to study consciousness, finite minds attempting to grasp concepts that stretch toward infinity, temporal creatures contemplating eternity. The very tools we use to examine these ideas, our capacity for abstract thought, our ability to imagine scenarios beyond our direct experience, are themselves part of the mystery we're trying to solve. Dr. Douglas Hofstadter, the cognitive scientist who wrote extensively about self-reference and consciousness, has noted that thinking about thinking creates what he calls strange loops in cognition. We become trapped in recursive cycles where the observer and the observed become entangled in ways that make objective analysis nearly impossible. Quantum immortality represents perhaps the ultimate strange loop, where consciousness contemplates its own potential immortality using the very awareness that might be subject to that immortality. This recursive quality reveals something profound about the nature of scientific inquiry itself. We often imagine science as a process of objective observation, where detached researchers study phenomena from a safe distance. But consciousness research, quantum mechanics, and theories like quantum immortality force us to confront the fact that we are not separate from what we study. We are embedded in the very phenomena we're trying to understand. The physicist John Wheeler captured this insight in his concept of the participatory universe, where observation and reality become inseparably intertwined. If consciousness plays a fundamental role in quantum mechanics, as some interpretations suggest, then our very act of studying quantum immortality might influence the phenomena we're investigating. We become participants in the cosmic experiment rather than mere observers. This participatory aspect adds another layer of unsettlement to the quantum immortality debate. If the theory is correct, then our current discussion of it might be part of the quantum mechanical process that maintains our existence. Every word we speak about consciousness transfer, every thought we think about parallel realities, might be carefully orchestrated by the universe to preserve our awareness in increasingly improbable branches of reality. The possibility transforms intellectual inquiry into a kind of existential performance, where the very act of questioning becomes part of the answer. We're not just studying quantum immortality, we might be living it, experiencing it, participating in it through the very process of trying to understand it. But perhaps this participatory quality points toward a different way of thinking about consciousness and existence altogether. Instead of viewing awareness as something that happens inside individual brains, separate from the external world, quantum mechanics suggests that consciousness might be a fundamental feature of reality itself, woven into the very fabric of space-time. This perspective, known as Pansychism, has gained renewed interest among philosophers and physicists in recent years. If consciousness is indeed a basic property of matter, like mass or electric charge, then questions about consciousness transfer become less mysterious. Awareness doesn't jump between realities because it was never confined to individual brains in the first place. Dr. Philip Goff, a philosopher at Durham University who studies panpsychism, argues that consciousness might be the intrinsic nature of physical reality. What we call matter might be consciousness viewed from the outside, while what we call consciousness might be matter experienced from the inside. This dual aspect view dissolves the traditional boundary between mind and matter, making concepts like quantum immortality less paradoxical. If consciousness is indeed fundamental to reality, then quantum immortality might not require miraculous transfers between parallel universes. Instead, it might simply reflect a natural tendency of awareness to persist, to find expression, to continue the cosmic process of the universe, observing itself through conscious beings. This cosmic perspective transforms the horror of quantum immortality into something approaching wonder. Instead of being trapped individuals clinging to existence in increasingly artificial realities, we might be temporary expressions of a universal consciousness that naturally seeks to maintain awareness through whatever means available. The shift in perspective doesn't eliminate the disturbing aspects of quantum immortality scenarios, but it places them in a different context. The degradation of individual consciousness, the isolation from meaningful relationships, the persistence in improbable realities, all of these might be transitional phases in a larger cosmic process that extends far beyond individual human experience. From this universal viewpoint, the horror of quantum immortality might stem from our attachment to individual identity, our insistence on maintaining the boundaries of personal selfhood, even as consciousness itself seeks to transcend those boundaries. The terror we feel might be the ego's resistance to its own dissolution, the finite self's fear of merging with something infinite and incomprehensible. Dr. Stanislav Grof, a psychiatrist who has studied altered states of consciousness for decades, describes what he calls ego death experiences, moments when individual identity dissolves and awareness expands to encompass broader realities. These experiences are often initially terrifying, but ultimately transformative, leading to profound insights about the nature of consciousness and reality. Perhaps quantum immortality scenarios represent a kind of cosmic ego death, where individual consciousness is forced to surrender its attachment to personal identity and merge with larger patterns of awareness. The horror we feel might be the natural resistance to this process, the ego's desperate attempt to maintain its familiar boundaries even as reality itself pushes toward transcendence. This interpretation suggests that the true terror of quantum immortality isn't the prospect of endless individual existence, but the possibility that individual existence itself might be an illusion that consciousness maintains temporarily before returning to its more fundamental, universal nature. We fear not death, but the dissolution of the self that we mistake for death. The mystical traditions of many cultures have long described similar processes, where individual awareness gradually dissolves into universal consciousness through practices like meditation, contemplation, or spiritual discipline. These traditions view such dissolution not as horror, but as liberation, the ultimate goal of conscious existence. If quantum immortality represents a forced version of this spiritual process, accelerated by the mathematics of quantum mechanics, rather than the gradual discipline of contemplative practice, then our terror might stem from the violence of the transition rather than its ultimate destination. We resist the process because it happens without our consent, without our preparation, without our understanding. But this resistance might itself be part of the process, a necessary stage in the development of consciousness towards something larger than individual identity. The quantum mechanical preservation of awareness in increasingly improbable realities might be the universe's way of teaching consciousness to let go of its attachment to particular forms, particular identities, particular ways of being. From this perspective, the scientific criticism of quantum immortality takes on new significance. The technical problems with the theory, the mathematical difficulties, the logical inconsistencies, all of these might be features rather than bugs, signs that consciousness is being pushed beyond the boundaries of rational thought towards something more fundamental than logic or mathematics. The incomprehensibility of quantum immortality might be intentional, a cosmic koan designed to exhaust the rational mind and open awareness to possibilities that transcend normal understanding. Like the paradoxes that Zen masters use to break through conceptual thinking, quantum immortality might be reality's way of shattering our attachment to conventional ideas about existence and death. This doesn't make the horror any less real or the practical problems any less significant. If we're caught in a cosmic teaching process, the experience remains genuinely terrifying from the perspective of individual consciousness. The dissolution of personal identity, whether spiritual or quantum mechanical, involves the death of everything we think we are, everything we believe defines us, everything we use to navigate daily existence. The terror is authentic because the transformation is real. Whether quantum immortality is physically accurate or not, contemplating it seriously changes something fundamental about how we understand ourselves and our place in reality. We cannot think deeply about these possibilities without being altered by the process. This transformative aspect of quantum immortality might be its most significant feature, more important than its scientific validity or practical implications. The theory serves as a mirror that reflects our deepest assumptions about consciousness, identity, and existence. In confronting its implications, we discover aspects of ourselves and our relationship to reality that might otherwise remain hidden. The quantum immortality debate forces us to examine questions that most of us spend our lives avoiding. What are we really? What persists when everything familiar changes? What would it mean to exist without the comfortable boundaries of individual identity? These are not merely theoretical questions, but practical ones that shape how we live, how we relate to others, how we find meaning in temporary existence. Perhaps the ultimate lesson of quantum immortality is not about the future of consciousness, but about the present nature of awareness. Right now, in this moment, you are participating in something extraordinary. The universe becoming conscious of itself through your awareness, matter organized in such a way that it can contemplate its own existence. The cosmic process of reality examining its own nature. Whether that process continues through quantum mechanical preservation of individual consciousness or dissolves into something larger and more fundamental, the miracle remains. You are here now, aware and wondering, participating in the ongoing conversation between mind and cosmos. The quantum shadows may hold infinite possibilities, some terrifying and some wonderful beyond imagination. But here now, in this moment of contemplation, we exist with the precious gift of awareness, the extraordinary capacity to wonder about our own nature, and the profound privilege of being conscious in a universe vast enough to contain both our deepest fears and our highest aspirations. The scientific questions remain unanswered. The philosophical problems persist. The mathematical paradoxes continue to challenge our understanding. But perhaps that's exactly as it should be. Perhaps consciousness itself is meant to remain partially mysterious, partially incomprehensible, partially beyond the reach of any final explanation. In that mystery, in that not knowing, we find something precious, the ongoing wonder of existence itself, the permanent possibility of surprise, the eternal invitation to explore realities that exceed our current understanding. Whether quantum immortality is real or not, whether consciousness survives death or dissolves at the moment of neural cessation, the fact remains that we are here now, capable of contemplating these profound possibilities. And in that contemplation, in that capacity for wonder and questioning and imagining possibilities beyond our direct experience, we touch something that might indeed be immortal. the universe's capacity to know itself through conscious beings, the cosmic process of awareness examining awareness, the eternal dialogue between being and becoming that unfolds in every moment of conscious existence. Perhaps that's miracle enough. Perhaps that's immortality enough. Perhaps in the end, the quantum shadows that seem so terrifying from the perspective of individual identity are actually invitations to participate more fully in the cosmic dance of consciousness, exploring itself through infinite forms, infinite possibilities, infinite expressions of the one awareness that underlies all existence. The mystery continues, vast and unresolved, waiting in the quantum depths of reality, and we continue with it, temporary expressions of eternal wonder, finite beings contemplating infinity, conscious participants in the universe's ongoing attempt to understand its own nature. In that participation, in that wonder, in that willingness to contemplate possibilities that challenge everything we think we know about existence, we find perhaps the deepest truth of all. That consciousness itself, whatever its ultimate nature, whatever its final destiny, is extraordinary beyond measure, precious beyond calculation, and worthy of our deepest respect and most profound gratitude. As we close this exploration of quantum immortality and its implications for our understanding of consciousness and reality, we're left not with answers, but with a transformed sense of the questions themselves. The horror that initially drew us into this investigation has evolved into something more complex, a recognition of the profound mystery that surrounds our own existence, an appreciation for the extraordinary nature of consciousness itself, and a humbling awareness of how little we truly understand about the nature of being alive. Whether you find yourself drifting towards sleep or continuing your quiet evening contemplation, carry with you the wonder of this moment. You are a conscious being in a universe strange enough to generate theories about quantum immortality, deep enough to contain parallel realities, and mysterious enough to make consciousness itself the greatest puzzle of all. The quantum shadows hold their secret still, whispering possibilities that we may never fully comprehend. But in our willingness to listen, to wonder, to contemplate possibilities that stretch our minds to their limits, we participate in something magnificent, the ongoing conversation between consciousness and cosmos, the eternal dialogue between what is and what might be, the cosmic dance of awareness exploring its own infinite nature. Sweet dreams, and may your rest be filled with the peace that comes from touching, however briefly, the deep mystery that underlies all existence. As we reach the end of this profound journey through the quantum shadows of existence, we find ourselves changed by the very act of contemplation. The concepts we've explored tonight, quantum immortality, the nature of consciousness, the possibility that reality itself might be stranger than we ever dared imagine. These ideas don't simply inform us, they transform us. There's something deeply moving about the human capacity to think thoughts that exceed our ability to fully comprehend them. We are finite beings contemplating infinity, temporary creatures wandering about eternity, conscious minds trying to understand consciousness itself. The very fact that we can formulate concepts like quantum immortality, even if they terrify us, speaks to something extraordinary about the nature of awareness. Tonight, we've stood at the edge of conceptual abysses that would have been unimaginable to our ancestors. We've peered into mathematical realms where consciousness might persist across parallel realities, where death becomes impossible, where existence itself becomes a kind of cosmic trap. And yet, in contemplating these possibilities, we haven't been diminished. we've been expanded. The terror that quantum immortality inspires in scientists isn't really about the theory itself. It's about confronting the profound mystery of what it means to be conscious in a universe that operates according to principles we can barely grasp. It's about recognizing that our existence, our awareness, our capacity to wonder and question and dream might be far stranger and more precious than we ever realized. As you settle into sleep tonight, or continue your quiet evening contemplation, remember that you are participating in one of the most remarkable phenomena in the known universe: consciousness observing itself, awareness turning inward to examine its own nature, mind contemplating mind. Whether quantum immortality is real or not, whether consciousness can transcend death or remains bound to neural activity, the fact remains that you are here, now, aware and wondering. This moment of awareness, this present experience of being alive and conscious and curious about the nature of existence is extraordinary, regardless of how long it lasts or what happens when it ends. You are the universe becoming aware of itself, matter organized in such a way that it can contemplate its own existence, atoms arranged to ponder atoms. The questions we've explored tonight may never find complete answers. The mysteries of consciousness, reality, and quantum mechanics may remain forever beyond our full comprehension. But in asking these questions, in pushing against the boundaries of understanding, in daring to think thoughts that stretch our minds to their limits, we participate in something magnificent. The ongoing conversation between mind and cosmos, consciousness and reality, being and becoming. Perhaps the deepest truth we've discovered is that existence itself is a kind of miracle, a temporary arrangement of matter and energy that somehow gives rise to awareness, wonder, and the capacity to contemplate its own nature. Whether that miracle lasts 70 years or 7 billion, whether it ends with death or continues through quantum mechanical processes we can barely imagine, it remains miraculous. In the quantum shadows of reality, infinite possibilities dance beyond our perception. Some may be beautiful beyond description, others terrible beyond imagination. But here now, in this moment of quiet contemplation, we exist with the precious gift of awareness, the extraordinary ability to wonder about our own existence, and the profound privilege of being conscious in a universe vast enough to contain both our fears and our dreams. If these explorations have sparked your curiosity about the fundamental nature of reality itself, you might find yourself fascinated by our next investigation into how mathematical infinity might not be merely an abstract concept, but a force that could literally tear apart the fabric of space-time itself. The mystery of infinity could break reality, will take us even deeper into the mathematical foundations that govern existence, revealing truths about the universe that make quantum immortality seem straightforward by comparison. Until we meet again in these quiet spaces of wonder and contemplation, may your dreams be filled with the infinite possibilities that dance in the quantum shadows of the mind. Sleep well, and remember that in a universe capable of generating consciousness, anything truly is possible. Good night. Anything truly is possible. Good night.